Isolde discovers Alaric's coded journal entries carved into the estate's walls. She begins deciphering them through botanical and historical analysis. The carved record. The afternoon light arrived in splinters through the cracked windows, catching dust motes that hung suspended like tiny ghosts. Isolde had been following the walls for hours, first one corridor, then another, her fingertips trailing across surfaces until they found what her eyes had missed. The carving was deliberate, deep gouges in the plaster, too precise to be accidental, too methodical to be the work of a madman. She stopped at a section where the stone had been carefully scraped away, revealing letters underneath the faded paint. Nocturna lunae tertius. Her breath caught. She pulled a small leather journal from her pocket, the one she'd begun keeping since arriving at Nachtmar, and opened it to a page of botanical sketches. Nightshade, moonflower, the third flowering cycle, the same words encoded differently in her own notes. "These aren't random marks," she whispered, tracing the carved letters with trembling fingers. "They follow a pattern." The script continued down the wall in a serpentine line, growing more elaborate as it descended. Botanical terms interspersed with dates, some recent, some spanning back decades. Measurements written in a shorthand she almost recognized. Alaric had carved a ledger into the very bones of the estate. She crouched to examine a section near the baseboard, where the letters were deepest, the stone beneath scarred from repeated carving. The work was meticulous, obsessive, the kind of documentation that only came from someone fighting against erasure. He knew his memory would reset. The realization struck her with the force of physical impact. She sat back on her heels, the journal forgotten in her lap. Alaric had told her as much. The curse unmade him each dawn, stripped him clean of the previous night's knowledge. So he'd carved. Night after night he'd gouged these words into the walls, leaving himself, leaving her, instructions. A shadow moved at the far end of the corridor. Isolde's spine straightened. She didn't turn toward it immediately, though her pulse quickened. The light had shifted, and with it came Alaric, emerging from the dimness between the pillars. His pale skin seemed to absorb what little illumination remained. In that instant she saw him as the walls must see him, a ghost leaving traces of himself behind. Alaric. His name escaped before she could measure it. "What have you been doing here? These words, they speak of things that should never be unearthed." She kept her voice low, barely above a whisper, but there was an edge to it, not quite accusation, but close. She gestured toward the carved script, her hand still shaking slightly from the weight of understanding. Alaric moved closer, his footfalls silent on the stone. When he spoke, his voice carried that same quality as the carved letters, something layered, something meant to persist. "Isolde, my dear, you've stumbled upon a truth far more dangerous than you can comprehend. This knowledge—" He paused, and she saw something flicker across his face. Defensiveness, yes, but also something rawer, desperation. "It's a burden I've carried alone for far too long." She stood, putting the width of her shoulders between them and the wall. "But why carve them here for anyone to find? And what are these rituals you speak of? The implications?" Her voice rose, despite her intention to keep it steady. "They're horrifying." Her hands shook as she continued to trace the words, following the line of his hidden language. The anger came suddenly, surprising her with its intensity. Betrayal, sharp and clean. He had known. He had been documenting something, leaving breadcrumbs for himself or for her or for whoever might find them, and he had never once mentioned it. "I had hoped to keep this from you," Alaric said quietly, "to spare you the weight of such dark truths, but now that you know, we must delve deeper." He stepped closer, and she felt the shift in the air between them, that strange pressure that always accompanied his proximity. His fingers brushed against hers where they rested against the wall. The contact sent something electric through her, a jolt that made her breath catch. "Together," he finished. Isolde pulled her hand back, breaking the circuit. She turned to face him fully, putting the width of the corridor between them now. Together? You think I would willingly subject myself to such horrors? Your power, it's a temptation I can barely resist, but I won't be your pawn in this twisted game. The words spilled from her mouth sharper than she intended, but they were true. She could feel it, the gravity of him, the way he seemed to bend the world around himself. It would be so easy to let him carry her forward, to stop questioning, to surrender to the momentum of his certainty. That was precisely why she had to resist. Alaric's expression shifted, something almost wounded crossing his features. Pawn? No, Isolde, you are far more than that. He stepped forward again, closing the distance she'd created. His presence filled the space like water finding its level, inevitable, overwhelming. Your strength, your intellect, they are the key to unraveling this mystery. Together we can face whatever darkness lies ahead. It was carefully said, a seductive offer wrapped in the language of partnership. She recognized it for what it was, a manipulation, perhaps unintentional, but a manipulation nonetheless, the kind that worked because it held a grain of truth. And if we should fail, Alaric? She held her ground, though every instinct urged her toward him. If these rituals unleash something we cannot control, the consequences... Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Her eyes searched his, looking for something, a sign of understanding perhaps, or acknowledgement of the genuine danger. They're unthinkable. For a long moment he didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, and she heard the estate settling around them. A creak in the floorboards, the whisper of wind through distant windows. Alaric's hand rose, his fingers brushing her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted everything his words had implied. Then we must not fail, Isolde. His voice was soft now, almost tender. The stakes are too high, the secrets too dangerous to leave buried. With you by my side, I believe we can face anything. It was a declaration wrapped in a promise. She felt the weight of it, not just his touch, but the implication that she was no longer an outsider to his burden, that by discovering his carved confessions she had crossed into something irreversible. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she turned back to the wall, her scholar's mind reasserting itself even as her heart hammered against her ribs. These symbols, she said, forcing her attention to the carved letters. The pattern, it repeats, here and here. She traced the recurring marks with the tip of her finger, creating distance between them by redirecting her focus. If I cross-reference them with the botanical texts in the library... You can decode them, Alaric finished, his hand dropping away. I can try. She pulled her journal open again, spreading it against the wall where the light was best. If these are truly your records, if you've been documenting the curse's mechanics night after night... She looked back at him, and something shifted. Not surrender, but a kind of grim determination. Then there might be a way forward that doesn't require me to trust you, just the evidence. Alaric's lips curved into something that could have passed for approval, or perhaps it was hunger, wearing a different mask. Then we begin, he said. And Isolde, surrounded by the carved confessions of a man who forgot himself each dawn, opened her journal to a fresh page and started to write.